the run-up to September 2014, we saw a massive, vibrant, exciting, very, very powerful social movement that it feels like it's gone now. It sort of feels like we're sort of living in the dust of it. But at the time, that was transformative.
It was. I mean, for me, that was one of the biggest lessons of the movement because, like I said, in the East End of Glasgow, you just all these people that were kind of battered down by life and circumstances, and yet, for the very first time ever in my life, I saw ordinary working class people in places like Easterhouse, places like Berlin, places like Shelton, actually involved and energetic and enthused about politics. For the first time ever, I'd seen that, you know, and that was an amazing change.
And how much of that was fed by this need, or a perceived need to change stuff?
I think Scottish independence is fundamentally about transforming Scotland. It has to be, you know, because one of the things that's always struck me is, you know, the stereotype that you get in the media, the mainstream media, about the Scottish independence supporter, and it's these kind of brave hearts who, you know, look to this romantic past of Scotland and they want Scottish independence because they think Scotland's better than anywhere else. And I don't see any of that.
I don't think anyone does, really. No. If there are, it's a
Scottish independence is about everybody, just about everybody I've ever met that's involved in the independence movement wants Scottish independence because they recognise that there's so much that's wrong with this country and they want to fix it. And that's what it's about. It's about fixing what's wrong with Scotland because there's so many things wrong with Scotland. And in a way, I think it's opponents of independence who have got the kind of rosy-eyed, romantic view that they accuse independence supporters of having because they don't seem to think there's any problems. You know, they're blind to... They think it's normal that we should live in this kind of society. They think it's normal that, you know, that the levels of poverty and deprivation that we've got in Scotland should be allowed to continue because that's normal, that's the best that we can aspire to. Well, it's not. It's not the best we can aspire to. We can do better than this. And the reason we're not doing better than this is because we don't have a control over our own society in this country.
Yeah. And that's, that is... Talking about things being fairly uncontrollable from within Scotland and getting ugly. Brexit.
Aye. Doug was growling when you said that.
I don't even think I need to frame a question around that. Everyone knows. I mean, what's going to happen?
Oh, Brexit is, as I called it in the blog the other day, is a multicoloured fuckstrosity. I don't know what's going to happen with Brexit, but it's not. There is no such thing as a good Brexit.
No.
There's no such thing as a good Brexit. You know, all shades of Brexit are bad. And it's
what's driving it? What?
English nationalism. English nationalism is driving it. English nationalism dressed up as British nationalism because they're basically the same thing.
And what's the difference? There's nationalism, as we all know. Nationalism is evil. You know, it's this vicious, sort of pernicious poison at the heart.
Well, partly it's because there's two different definitions of nationalism, and the English language conflates two very different phenomena under the one label. And as someone who speaks Spanish, you will know this, you know, because when I lived in Spain, I would never, ever describe myself as a nacionalista escocés. Never.
No, because that has Franco...
Because that has connotations of fascism, really. I would always describe myself as an independentista. Always. Yeah. A Scottish independence supporter. And English lacks nuance. The English language lacks that nuance that you find in Spanish. It lumps these two very different phenomena, the aggrandizement of an existing state and the desire for a nation without a state to have a state. Two very different phenomena, and the English language lumps those two things together under the label of nationalists.
So if we look at English nationalism as a driving force for Brexit.
Well, it's English exceptionalism, I would say, really.
Well, yeah, that's what I wanted you to talk about. What is English nationalism? For people in Scotland who are used to this idea of Scottish nationalism, the independent...
Well, I'm thinking that, you know, really that we should try and stop talking about unionism in Scotland. because it's not unionism. This isn't, and that feeds into that kind of narrative that somehow this is a debate between nationalism and non-nationalism in Scotland, and it's not. It's a debate between two versions of nationalism: Scottish nationalism, which is nationalism of the independentista variety, and British nationalism, which is nationalism of the nationalista variety.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's unhelpful to talk about unionism, because unionism implies somehow that it's not really nationalist. And one of the reasons I gave up Twitter actually was because I get sick fed up with all these people with union flags and their avatars telling me how much they hate nationalism. And I said, well, just fucking look at yourself there.
A wee bit of a mirror.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's English nationalism, British nationalism. British nationalism is just a kind of cover term for English nationalism, really. And it's this sense of exceptionalism that somehow they really, that is nationalism in the classic sense of the word, the aggrandisement of an existing state, the belief that fundamentally that your state, your nation is better than anybody else. And that's what drives it. They think somehow that the world owes them a favour, somehow, you know, that everybody's just going to cave in and give them everything they want. When Theresa May talks about their special deal, basically what she thinks is that somehow all the existing advantages that the UK has got from the European Union are going to be allowed to continue, while at the same time the UK can leave the European Union and not be bound by any of its rules, because they're special. And everybody will just bend over and give it to them because they're special and they're so much better than everybody else. And we stood against Hitler, you know. You know, no, that's shite.
Is it racism? Is it supremacism?
Partly, yeah. It's definitely supremacism. It's definitely supremacism. I think England, as opposed to Scotland, has always been kind of semi-detached from Europe, because in the national psyche, if there's such a thing, or the national mythology, it's defined by the Channel, whereas Scotland's national mythology is defined by the border, which makes it more like a European state. European states have land borders with one another.
I hadn't thought of that. That's
And Scotland has a border, whereas the border with Scotland doesn't really figure largely in the consciousness of English nationalism.
Yeah.
You know?
Where Britishness is greater.
They talk about
Englishness.
this island race, for example, the English. You know, it's well, you're actually you're a part of an island. You know, you're not a whole island.
Yeah.
But Scotland has a border, and because we have a border, that makes us more like, you know, France or Germany or Belgium or the Netherlands or whatever.
So we see ourselves as having a border, whereas England sees us
as being an island,
as being the back door.
As being an island,
yeah.
So they're kind of semi-detached, but you know, and also I think because Scotland always historically wanted to connect with the rest of Europe as a counterbalance against the influence of England, because England is such a bigger, you know, it's bigger and more power. I mean, now in terms of population, England is massive compared to Scotland. It wasn't always that. I mean, England was always bigger in terms of population than Scotland, but the imbalance population-wise was not as pronounced as it has been since the Union. That's actually one of the interesting things, that, you know, when Scotland became part of the United Kingdom, I believe the population of Scotland was approximately a quarter of the population of England, something like that.
Could have been.
It's now about a tenth, less than a tenth.
Less than a tenth, yeah.
You know, and our population growth has not kept pace with the European average. You know, I mean, in Ireland it's been even more catastrophic because you know, because of the results of the famine.
People.
Yeah, but Scotland, like Ireland, has historically, ever since it's become a part of the United Kingdom, has exported people. That's been our role in this union, as a reservoir of resources and people.
Does the prospect of Brexit then, in your opinion, does that put some sort of time limit on another referendum?
Yeah, I think we have to have the referendum within the term of this Scottish Parliament, because that's what the SNP government has their mandate for. It's very obvious in opinion poll after opinion poll that independence is far more popular than the SNP. So I think it would be a huge, huge mistake for what some people have been saying in the SNP, some people in the SNP leadership have been airing this idea that we should wait until 2021 and renew our mandate. And when I've been talking about that with people in yes groups up and down the length of the country and the SNP local branches, that's gone down like a cup of cold sick, that idea. Nobody likes that at all, because the SNP have their mandate just now, and well, I don't want them to make the same mistake that the Labour Party has made historically. The Labour Party started out as being the political voice of a broader Labour movement, right? And then the Labour Party, the parliamentary Labour Party, began to see the Labour movement as being the servant of the parliamentary Labour Party. And I don't want the SNP to make that same mistake. You know, the SNP should be the servant of the independence cause. The independence cause is not the servant of the SNP.
And what happens if we miss the bus?
If we miss the bus, we're fucked.
Yeah.
Basically, because it's just... Well, I think Scotland will still become independent. I'm convinced that the question facing us now isn't should Scotland become independent, but when should Scotland become independent? And I think it will happen. But I would rather it happened with the least amount of pain rather than with the maximum amount of pain. And I think if we don't go for it, you know, within the next couple of years, then we're in for a whole lot of pain. Because the Conservatives are definitely going to try and weaken and undermine the Scottish Parliament. They're already taking steps to do that. Some people are afraid that they're going to try and abolish Holyrood. I don't think that that's stupid, but they're certainly going to try and neuter it.
Certainly, historically, I mean, living in Ireland and being, you know, introduced to sort of national politics within Ireland, that's where I've spent, you know, a great deal of my adulthood, has a track record with dealing with Britain in an independence struggle. Entirely different. It did involve guns and bombs and bullets. But Britain does have form in shutting national parliaments. The first Dáil, 1919, was shut down and really sparked a war of independence.
They don't call it perfidious Albion for nothing.
So, actually,
there's always what my grandfather, who was Irish, always used to say. It was always
perfidious Albion.
No, my Irish grandfather, always used to say the real reason the sun never set in the British Empire was because God didn't trust the English in the dark.
Yeah. But do you really think it's inconceivable that Holyrood might be one of the...
No, it's not inconceivable. It's not inconceivable, but I think it's unlikely. I think it's more likely that they will neuter it. They will neuter it rather than abolish it, because they can achieve the same ends by neutering it without actually abolishing it. You know, whereas abolishing it would cause an immediate political outcry in Scotland, which would then have to be managed, whereas they can just achieve the same ends by neutering it. You know, so I think that's the route that they'll go, because they're not stupid, you know.
Well, to wrap up, I really only have one question with two sides. What's your vision of Scotland not independent post-Brexit? 20 years from now, Scotland, part of one United Kingdom, Brexited. What does it look like?
The same depressing shit that we've had for the past 50 years, only worse, without public services, with greater inequality, with people having to leave to find jobs and thinking that it's normal, you know, that emigration is normal, that thinking that, you know, that the levels of poverty and deprivation that we've got are normal, you know, that public services will be stripped to the bone. One of the things I think we need Scottish independence for, paradoxically, is to protect Britishness. The things that came out, things that people value of the British state that came out of the post-war settlement, you know, like the national health and free education and a comprehensive social security network, you know, all these kind of things that came out, you know, employment rights, all these kind of things that came out of the post-war settlement, the things that for a lot of people of the older generation define Britishness. the only way we'll preserve those things is with independence. And if we don't have independence, we'll lose them all. We'll end up like a kind of a cut-rate version of the United States with worse weather. You know, that's what we'll end up like.
The mirror of that question is, what's it going to look like if we don't miss the bus, if we take it?
It's not going to be
vote yes?
paradise. You know, it's not going to be paradise. But I do think that we will be, as a country, considerably better off than we are at the moment, that we will have far better infrastructure than we'll have at the moment. I think that we'll be able to do things to tackle, I'm not saying that we will completely abolish poverty and inequality in Scotland, but I think we'll be able to go a long way towards tackling these things. I think we have a chance of a fairer and more just society. And I definitely think that we will have better public services.
Will we be a one-party state?
No, of course not. Of course not. It's nonsense to suggest that Scotland would be a one-party state. One of the great things about the independence movement, what the independence movement proved, I mean, as you pointed out earlier, you know, Ireland's path to independence was a violent one, you know. And in most countries, that's how independence debates are conducted, you know, violently. Or with states of emergency or disappearances, or as was happening in Spain and Catalonia, people are being put in jail. We don't see any of that in Scotland, and that is a testament to the incredible respect that people in Scotland have got for democracy and democratic institutions. And of course Scotland will become a democracy. Of course Scotland will be a democracy. If Scotland's an independent country, and as a one-party state. I mean, you're not a one-party state because the opposition parties are so shit that people won't vote for them. That's not the definition of a one-party state, you know. You know, you can't blame, you know, it's basically saying that, oh, it's a one-party state, it's a one-party state. They're basically trying to blame the SNP for their own incompetence. You know, but having said that, I don't think the SNP would survive in its current form after Scottish independence. Because the forces that are holding it together, it's a party that encompasses people with very different political views. And what's holding it together is this drive for Scottish independence. And once that's achieved, then obviously, you know, normal politics resume. You know, it's no longer dominated by the constitutional question.
Normal politics.
Exactly, and that's all I want. I just want that's what I want Scottish independence for. I want Scottish independence so that we can stop talking about it. You know, so that we can stop talking about this and get back to talking about social justice and inequality and all these kind of things. And we're not able to do that because Scotland it's a nation that's not allowed to be a nation. It's a country that's not allowed to act like a country. And we're constantly contorting ourselves in order to try and combine those two contradictory things. That's what happens with Britishness. That's why British nationalists in Scotland are, I mean, I think I said it in the National article I wrote today, that the fascinating thing about British nationalists, I was talking about the Tory conference, and the fascinating thing about British nationalist events in Scotland is how they're able to strut and cringe at the same time. You know, and it's that contradictory, you know.
Don't want to think about that.
But it's combining that contradiction, you know, that's what causes the cringe. You know, it's the psychological attempt to combine that contradiction. And once we're free of that contradiction, then we can actually start to tackle the problems that Scotland's got. And that's what independence is about. It's about tackling the problems that Scotland has got. And I want an independence movement that's a grassroots movement that's not directed from the top by politicians, but it's ordinary citizens getting involved to change their country for the better. Because that's the kind of Scotland I want. And I hope that in an independent Scotland, that movement, that grassroots movement of involved citizens changing their country will define the kind of country that we get. That a country which is full of involved and informed citizens who aren't afraid to speak up, and we get rid of this passivity that's defined us for far too long.
Paul Kavanagh, wee ginger dog, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. I think we can wrap